Good day to each and everyone. Our discussion for today is all about the what is an operating system. Nowadays, modern computers consist of many ways, such as one or more processors, main memory, disks, printers, various input and output devices. Managing all these varied components requires a layer of software. This is the operating system. Let us continue. So, these are the examples of an OS of a mic of a computer or in mobile phone. Okay? There's an Apple, Linux, Windows, iOS, Android, and Ubuntu. So this is the CLI or the command line interface. So the CLI is a user interface to a computer's operating system or an application in which the user responds to a visual prompt by typing in a command on a specified line. Also receives a response back from the system and then enters another command and so forth. Okay? So these are the examples of the CLI that all the responses is executed in this way. Okay? So the benefits of using a CLI rather than a graphical user interface. So there is a difference between the CLI and the GUI. Okay, so let us discuss it one by one. So for example, the topic is in the right side, and then the purpose in CLI and the GUI. So let us start from is due to a higher degree of memorization and familiarity needed for operation and navigation, new users find operating a command and line interface more difficult than a GUI. So in GUI, because a GUI is much more visually intuitive, users typically pick up on how to use a GUI faster a command line interface. It is the difference between the uh, CLI and GUI in terms of ease. Sunod the control. Users have a good bit of control over both the file in OS and a command line interface. However, for new or novice users, it is not as user-friendly as a GUI, okay, in terms of control. In GUI naman, a GUI offers a lot of access to files, softwares, feature, and the operating system as a whole, being more user-friendly than a command line, especially for new or novice user. A GUI utilized by more users. The next one in multitasking. Although many command line environments are capable of multitasking, they do not offer the same ease and ability to view multiple things at once on one screen. And in GUI users have windows that enable a user to view, control, manipulate, and toggle through multiple programs and folders at the same time. Next, so this is the difference between the GUI and CLI. So let us continue. In terms of resources, a computer that is only using the command line takes a lot less of the computer system resources than a GUI. In GUI, a GUI requires more system resources because of the elements that require loading, such as an icon and fonts. Video, mouse, and other drivers need to be loaded, taking up additional system resources. So mas GUI is mas maganda dito, no? Pagdating sa resources. So sunod is the scripting. Scripting. A command line interface mostly requires users to already know scripting commands and syntax, making it difficult for new or novice users to create scripts. In GUI, creating scripts using a GUI has become much easier with the help of programming software, which allows users to write the script without having to know all the commands and syntax. Programming software provides guides and tips for how to code specific functions, as well as preview options to see it and how the script will work. The next one is the remote access. In CLI, when accessing another computer or device over a network, a user can manipulate the device or its files with a command line interface. However, you must know the commands and to do so and is not as easy for new or novice users. In GUI, remotely access another computer or server is possible in a GUI and easy to navigate with little experiences. IT professionals typically use a GUI for remote access, including the management of servers and user computers. So the story behind the Linux operating system, because Linux is an example of an OS in terms of computer. So the story of the Linux will be discussed. Okay? So the Linux history and how it became so popular. In 1985, Free Software Foundation, or the FSF, founded by Richard Stallman, along with other programmers, creates the tools needed to make a Unix-compatible OS. 1985 from Professor Andy Tahinbaum creates a Unix-like operating system based on System 5 Unix for the IBM PC and PC-80 computers. It is called Minix or Minix. So, let us continue. Richard Stallman releases GPL and GNU software but lacks a free kernel. In 1991, building on the concepts in Minix, Linus Torvalds, Finnish college student, develops Linux along with help from other users on the web. So, who invented the Linux OS? So, Linux is the first truly free Unix-like OS. The underlying GNU project was launched in 1983 by Richard Stallman, originally developed a Unix-compatible OS called GNU. Okay? So, if you see Richard Stallman, intended to be entirely free software. So, free po ang OS in terms of Linux. So, it is downloadable online with free subscription. Many programs and utilities were contributed by developers around the world, and by 1991, most of the components of the system were ready. Still missing was the kernel. So, ang kernel isang program siya sa computer. Ito yung naka-invento po ng Linux na operating system. So, Linus Torvalds invented a Linux itself. Linus Torvalds. In 1991, Torvalds was a student at the University of Helsinki in Finland, where he had been using Minix or Minix, a non-free Unix-like system, and began writing his own kernel. He started by developing device drivers and hard drive access, and by September that year, in 1991, had a basic design that he called version 0.01. This kernel was called Linux, was afterwards combined with the GNU system to produce a complete free OS. So nag-combine po yung Linux and GNU to become free OS. So Linus Torvalds invented the Linux itself in 1991. Torvalds was a student at the University of Helsinki in Finland, where he had been using the Minix, an free Unix-like system, and began writing his own kernel. He started by developing device drivers and hard drive access by September. No? Okay. On October 5, 1991, Torvalds sent a posting to the Computer OS Minix news group announcing the release of version 0.02. So there is another version of the Linux. So itong version 0.02. A basic version that still needed Minix to operate, but which attracted considerable interest or nevertheless. The kernel was then rapidly improved by Torvalds and a growing number of volunteers communicating over the internet. And by December 19, 1991, a functional standalone Unix-like Linux system was released as version 0.11 or 11. On January 5, 1992, the Linux version on 0.12 or 12 was released as an improved stable kernel. The next release was called version 0.95 to reflect the fact that it was becoming a full-featured system. After that, Linux became an underground phenomenon with a growing group of distributed programmers that continue to debug, develop, and enhance the source code baseline to this day. Torvalds released version 0.11 under a freeware license of his own devising, but then released version 0.12 under the well-establishing GNU General Public License. More and more free software was created for Linux over the next several years. The Linux continued to be improved through the 1990s and started to be used in large-scale applications like web hosting, networking, and database serving, proving ready for production use. The next for the Linux is the version 2.2, a major update. The Linux kernel was officially released on January 1999. By the year 2000, most computer companies supported Linux in one way or another, recognizing a common standard that could finally reunify the fractured world of the Unix wars. The next major release was version 2.4 on January 2001, providing, among other improvements, compatibility with the upcoming generations of Intel's 64-bit Itanium computer processors. So, cost comparison of Linux and Windows. So, there is a comparison. So, Linux can be freely distributed, downloaded freely because the Linux is downloadable in online. So, it is free. Distributed through magazines, books, etc. So these are priced version for Linux also, but they are normally cheaper than Windows because the Windows OS are expensive than Linux. It can cost up to 119 to 100.99 US dollar and $69 for student and $99 to upgrade to Pro. So ito yung comparison ng Linux and Windows. So we will discuss it thoroughly, the comparison and other OS in other uh, videos. Thank you so much and God bless. Bye-bye.